All right. I am Ben Burgis. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined once again by the people's econ prof, Rob Larson. Uh, and you were you were just doing something we put the link to in the description, right? The library deal.
Yeah, man. Yeah, we did a fun panel with me and a couple other folks who have books coming out this August, or this summer, I should say. And this was just today on the Library Journal website, the big, librarian trade publication there. And it was extremely fun, and all the books were really good. I have to admit, there's some really, really slick ones on propaganda and freedom and other stuff that I'm interested in, and you, the audience, will be interested in. So you should pull that up. We've got the link, as I understand it, in the show notes. I'm led to understand, and it is Library Journal. You do have to do a little registration thing, but they don't talk to you. It's just they can monitor the audience and stuff, size that is. But it was it was very, very fun, very funny. We had a great time. People really should check it out.
Yeah, and this is the ruling class book.
Indeed, yes. My book coming out this August 20. Yes, Mastering the Universe. It's incredibly fun. To look okay. I'm very proud of this book. It's going to be a really fun thing for people to check out at the end of the summer.
Nice. Yeah. The last couple of times that you were on, we were watching things that were more directly related, although, I would argue not entirely unrelated to that subject. Because that's been very focused on domestic policy stuff the last few weeks that we've been doing debate breakdowns. We didn't do one last Thursday because I was on my way to New Jersey, did that teach-in at the encampment in Princeton on Friday, and then did some other stuff in New Jersey over the weekend, got back to the West Coast Sunday night, and spent a couple of days with friend of the show Jason Miles in Mexico, and got back here last night. But because of all that, we're figuring out what to do a little bit later than usual. And so it seemed like, just kind of given the cadence of these debate breakdowns, the last few were domestic policy. We're kind of probably due for something Israel-Palestine related. It's definitely what's on people's minds. God knows it's been what's on my mind, right? So obviously the thing at Princeton last week, and then actually just today I recorded something for the Monk debate podcast with Jamie Kirchik. We debating resolved the campus protesters were on the right side of history. So that's going to come out, I think, on Tuesday. Right. And then literally moments before, I guess like 7 or 8 minutes, I actually took a minute and reheated my coffee and gave the dog a chance to pee. But 7 or so minutes before we started, I finished recording something with Jonathan Church for the Marion West podcast that was on a sort of related series of topics about the campus protests and what's going on in Palestine. Although I have to say, actually, that second one was definitely in certain ways better than the first. Like the Jamie Kirchik thing was it was good. I have no objection to anything the organizers did or anything like that. But it's definitely something figured out over the course of the last several years of doing a fuck ton of these is that you can't try to respond to every single thing that's said as a losing strategy. You have to pick your battles. And, so, it was definitely yeah, man, I wish we had a little bit more time to get into some of the things that Jamie said at various points on that were oh, come on. I really want to get into that, but it's all right, I have a very limited amount of time here. I basically want to make the points that it's the atrocities in Gaza are really bad, and it's really absurd to call people anti-Semitic for protesting that, especially because lots of the protesters are Jewish. and like really basically wanted to just say that, and then kind of as haphazardly managed to respond to a couple of other things. But then the Marion West thing was nice because it was definitely an interview by somebody who disagreed with me, but it was but actually this is nuts. Actually, dot every I and cross every T, which is this exactly the sort of thing that, this is the expectation of being able to do that is definitely the biggest thing I had to unlearn from the habits of all those years of university teaching. When I started doing this, oh goddamn, it's not like a class. You can't just roll around discussing everything until you're until time's over, right? It's like you gotta just pick the things that's most important to say and say them.
Yeah, sadly, that grad school symposium format, that's the way to run down ideas and talk about it till it's done. And you really can be thorough there. Unfortunately, it takes 9 hours on a Sunday. So when you do debates and you have 1 minute, as you said, you got to stick to your most powerful, quick, central points. Yes, such as crimes against humanity, bad. That's strong start. That's that's what we're reduced to by time formats. That's we've seen that many times on these shows. Yeah, if you insist on going after everything they throw out, you're just hastily, frantically running from thing to thing. You don't really have time to address things convincingly, so you just remind everyone of the things they said. Unless you just seem frantic, you seem it's a turnoff as a method too. It doesn't look good for whatever we know how it does. It's a performance process and. A firm command of the material, you'll go slow. And you laugh off the dumb things. I love how you put that too. I wish we had more time to explore some of the remarks you made, which are ill-conceived, perhaps. That's very, that's again, it's good. It's just good debate discipline there, Burgis. That's very nice. Years of experience, you stick to your main points. It takes discipline to friggin' do that,
Yeah, I mean, this is, I actually, it's always stuck with me. At the hotel bar in Phoenix, getting ready to debate Charlie Kirk, I was reading this old interview with Christopher Hitchens, where he said that he was talking about a debate that he'd done recently at the time of the interview, and he was like, "Yeah, I think I messed up a little bit because you can only really have one goal." Right? I was trying to do a couple things at the same time, and one might be pushing it. I think it might be okay to have a couple, but you have to. You do, as far as at all possible, have to have a very clear idea of okay, here's exactly what I want people to get out of this, and you should really have that in your head before you show up, so that the decisions that you make during it will reflect that, right? It's okay, do I really want to argue about whether something that Barry Weiss's newspaper said happened at Columbia actually happened or not, or do I want to talk about the atrocities in Gaza?
That's exactly. It's well chosen as an example. Yeah, you got to some of these things they are intolerable, but it's small fry. Oh God, let these.
Yeah. Sometimes somebody says something that's so bad. You're no, I guess I really do need to slam the brakes and just talk about this. But,
it's God, it is frustrating, and even when we're here doing the show and we watch these pieces, I'm always, just writing down a few things that I want to react to that one or the other party made, and we get to half of them, and sometimes later I look at it, I'm oh shit, I should have said even here, it's an inevitable sacrifice to economy. If you're in a symposium or writing a book, fucking run down every strand. That's the fun of that. But you're on stage, you gotta you gotta talk and shut up.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, one thing that really helps is if you happen to be talking to somebody who is so manifestly odious that his very presence lends dishonor to whatever he's saying. You get a real lit up when that's the case. And on that note, man, I just could not be happier that the person who keeps being trotted out to defend the state of Israel is Alan Dershowitz, because I just can't think of branding that I would prefer to be given that cause than the Dersh.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, Dersh, and if Martin Shkreli could be paroled from prison, I think like, ooh. You also, that's good.
Yeah. If there was some kind of work,
very select class.
Yeah, if there was some kind of work,
Zionism, but they do have the perfect faces for it.
Yeah, there was some kind of work release program where Shkreli was let out purely to do debates with Norm Finkelstein.
Yeah. Oh my God, I would love that. And that, just mention Finkelstein, we should just restate here. I'm sure people have seen this, but that piece of Finkelstein's today and Jacobin itself, very great piece of writing. Everyone should take a look at that. If you've ever seen Finkelstein talk, like, he is obsessively thoughtful about not just like the issues, but movements and, the importance of tactics and dumb optics and simple points that are, have that moral force. Just a good thing for us to mention. But yeah, Dershowitz, I get, as you said, it's like, for us, this is like eating a bowl of candy. Like, this is just like a big treat, And before we start, though, we should clear up a misconception. People like to say all kinds of crazy things about Dershowitz's career. He was not one of the attorneys on Skeletor's defense team. He just consulted. Yeah. He only consulted on that case. So that's just a misconception I heard recently. That's why.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's really unfair that, I think he went on CNN a couple of times to say that that Skeletor was actually like a model member of the community, but like it's really petty the way that people miss these distinctions. And he never appeared in court on Skeletor's behalf.
Yes, that was never proven anyway. It was never definitively shown that he did that. At least, I heard Alan Dershowitz is upset because he's getting backlash. People are icing him out of social events because of his association with the Skeletor defense. So it's all, it's, again, so many injustices in our society. What is bigger than Alan Dershowitz's inconvenience? Nothing.
No, absolutely not. No, if all the backlash about Skeletor meant that he couldn't get invited to as many dinner parties on Martha's Vineyard, that is definitely the top thing we should be concerned about. But yes,
I'm sure it'll come up.
As far as the guy who did the most, of course, classically, to expose Dershowitz as the massive fraud that he is, definitely very strongly co-sign the endorsement of the Norm Finkelstein piece in Jacobin. I think this is like an edited version of the remarks he gave at the encampment at Columbia. It's called like if we're talking about the same thing, right? It's called like Build a Majority for Palestine or something like that.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, exactly. I loved that. Shared that everywhere. Big fan of that article. But there's a really nice sort of mixture of like, hey, look, you guys will have to figure this out. I'm an old man. You're doing lots of stuff right, but not for nothing. Here's some stupid shit I've done over the years, and maybe you can learn from it.
Yeah, and he is self-critical of his, youthful activism time in a harsh manner, you could argue.
Yeah. I think he has like a sense of humor about some of the absurdity of that. I was actually thinking about that during the Jamie Kirchick debate today, that there's a point where, Jamie Kirchick, was like, and then we're talking about like historical parallels to other protests. He was like, some of these people, they weren't just against the Vietnam War, so they were actually Maoists. So it's like, okay, sure. But like also the Vietnam War was really bad, right?
Yeah.
Like
it's good to be against bad wars. Sorry.
Yeah. Guys. Like, yes, some people at some protests said stupid shit, but like, nonetheless, like killing, millions of Vietnamese peasants, and napalming all the jungles and Vietnam was really bad, and it was actually a good and honorable thing to speak out against that at the time. And, yeah, there might be some parallels here, might be worth thinking on. But in any case, so what we're going to be watching is an old one, not super old, but like, several years back. It is the Dersh at Oxford Union debating BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions with, do you know the other guy, the Peter Tatchell?
No, I don't.
Okay, well, so this will be, this will be a new character in the Thursday night debate breakdown extended universe. But
here comes a new challenger.
Yeah, exactly. But he started out strong. Like it's a good way to introduce himself to us to be arguing with Alan Dershowitz. Which look, I guess we've made some harsh jokes about Dershowitz in the last few minutes, and we'll make many more over the course of the evening. But I do want to say, in all seriousness, the man is good at his job. If anyone watching this has a lot of money and killed their wife, they should really consider him as legal representation. He has a very strong track record. So,
if you're a cool but misunderstood guy who's been very prosperous in life and whose bitchy wife died under mysterious but totally understandable circumstances, I would consider the Dershowitz's litigation firm. That's definitely a strong choice. I would just add, too, that the chat is already cracking up, so could you guys stop, please? It's messing up my concentration.
Yeah, fair enough.
Let's watch.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we'll be debating the question, is the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement against Israel wrong? Speaking in the affirmative is Professor Alan Dershowitz, and speaking in the negative is Mr. Peter Tatchell. The debate will be broken into two parts. In the first part, we will begin with each speaker making initial submissions and then responding to the other's initial submissions. During this part, no questions or comments will be taken from the floor. In the second part, you will have the opportunity to ask questions of the speakers about the BDS movement. Please note that since each speaker is obliged to answer your questions, that they must be directed to both speakers. To reiterate that point, your questions cannot be directed at any one speaker or at one side of the debate. Finally, in the interests of all sides of the debate, I'd like at this stage, as President, to issue a ruling on the provision prohibiting conduct intended to disrupt debates. For the avoidance of doubt, I rule that this provision includes a prohibition on any banners, posters, or other visual materials. I encourage members instead to ask questions during the second part of the debate. But now to the debate itself. I remind the House that during this part, no questions or comments will be taken from the floor, and I look to Professor Dershowitz for his initial submissions.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor for me to be in this historic room and to be debating so distinguished an opponent. The BDS movement, which is directed solely at Israel, the only nation state of the Jewish people, is immoral, illegal, undercuts the two-state solution, makes a compromise peace less likely, and is bad for Palestinians. That's why President Abbas of the Palestinian Authority and virtually every leader in the world is opposed to it. Before we get to the present and the future, just a few words about the past. In 1947, the United Nations partitioned the British Mandate into two potential states, one for the Jewish people of Palestine, one for the Arab people of Palestine. The Jewish leadership accepted this two-state solution. The Palestinian leadership rejected it. When Israel declared statehood in 1948, all the surrounding Arab nations and the Palestinian leadership attacked the nation-state of the Jewish people, killing 1% of its population, many of whom were Holocaust survivors. The result of this attack were two refugee problems. Approximately 700,000 Arabs became refugees, and approximately the same number of Jews had to leave Muslim countries in which they had lived for thousands of years. It also led Egypt to occupy the Gaza Strip and Jordan to occupy the West Bank. And between 1948 and 1967, the Palestinian leadership engaged in massive acts of terrorism against the Jewish population of Israel. This was before there was any Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. The Israeli occupation resulted from the '67 war, which Egypt began by closing the Straits of Tiran in violation of international law and massing its armies on the Sinai. Israel destroyed Egypt's air force and tried desperately to keep Jordan out of the war. When Jordan attacked, Israel responded and legitimately occupied the West Bank. In 1967, Israel accepted the Security Council Resolution 242, calling for an exchange of land for peace. The Palestinian leadership and all the Arab countries met in Khartoum and issued their three famous no's: no peace, no negotiation, no recognition. Since that time, Israel has offered the Palestinians a return of the captured land in exchange for peace on at least 3 occasions. The Palestinian leadership has refused to accept these offers, even when Israel unilaterally ended its occupation and its civilian settlements in all of the Gaza Strip, hoping that the Gaza would become the Singapore of the Mediterranean. Hamas used the end of the occupation as an opportunity to fire thousands of rockets at Israeli civilian targets. Israel responded, as any democracy would. And in the process, civilians were killed, largely because Hamas had adopted a tactic of firing its rockets and building its terror tunnels from within densely populated civilian areas. Most recently, individual Palestinians have been incited to kill Jewish Israelis by using knives. And Israel has responded to terrorism with checkpoints, a security barrier, house demolitions, administrative detention, and other compromises with civil liberties, some of which I disagree with, that are typical of democracies seeking to strike a balance between preserving the rule of law and protecting its civilians from terrorism, much as Britain has struck a balance that some of us disagree with in its war against terrorism. This then is a brief overview of the macro situation that has generated the call to boycott, divest, and sanction the only democracy in the Middle East, the only nation state of the Jewish people, and the only country in the Middle East that operates under the rule of law, and the country that has offered to end the conflict and accept the two-state solution the United Nations proposed nearly 70 years ago. Now a word about my own views on the Israel-Palestine conflict. Many of you know Mr. Tatchell's long and distinguished record of human rights, much of which I admire and agree with. Fewer of you know my long history of support for progressive causes, especially equality with regard to race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, ethnicity, and national origin. I am pro-Israel and pro-Palestine. Since 1970, I have favored a two-state solution and have opposed the Israeli settlement policy since 1973. I am not a hawk. I am a dove who craves peace, but who believes that Israel has the right and the obligation to defend its civilians against rockets, terror tunnels, suicide bombings, knifing attacks, and other violence directed against civilian population. Nor am I always opposed to all forms of pressure, economic, though I am opposed to all academic and cultural boycotts. What I strongly oppose is the double standard under which Israel is singled out by the BDS movement under discussion today. What then is the BDS movement? Who supports it? Who opposes it? And what's its impact on the peace process? First and foremost, the BDS movement is against the two-state solution. Listen to its founder, Omar Barghouti, talk about the two-state solution. Quote, "Good riddance. The two-state solution is finally dead. Someone has to issue the official death certificate. We can all move on, etc. Definitely, most definitely, we oppose a Jewish state in any part of Palestine." Even Norman Finkelstein, certainly not a friend of Israel's policies, opposed BDS because, quote, "there's a large segment of the movement that wants to eliminate Israel. That segment includes its leaders." My major reason for opposing BDS is that BDS is directed only against Israel, not against the Palestinian Authority, which has repeatedly refused to accept Israel's reasonable offers to end the occupation, nor is it directed at the dozens of other nations which are tyrannical and have genocidal policies and actions. We will talk about that, obviously, in detail later. And what about other countries that are enforcing military occupations with far less justification than Israel has had? Russia, Turkey, China, Indonesia, Armenia, Azerbaijan all continue to occupy territories that lawfully belong to their neighbors. Where is the boycott movement, the official BDS movement against these oppressors? Let me quote a distinguished advocate of human rights. Quote, "I find it strange that some people condemn Israel while remaining silent about these other equally or more oppressive occupations. Many of Israel's critics are also silent about neighboring Arab dictatorships. And where are the protests and calls for boycotts against the tyrannies of Saudi Arabia, Iran, Burma, etc.? Why the double standards?" End quote. That advocate, of course, is Mr. Tatchell, who today supports this double standard by standing in favor of the BDS movement only against Israel, a movement that singles out only Israel for boycotts, divestment, and sanctions. My distinguished opponent, unlike the leaders of the BDS movement, refuses to visit any nation, quote, with poor human rights records. That doesn't leave a lot of places. You must be spending a lot of your vacation time in Switzerland. Oh, I forgot. Switzerland has a terrible record with regard to compensating Holocaust survivors who had deposits in Swiss banks. I guess it's off to Monaco for your next vacation. But Mr. Tatchell does not represent the BDS movement. He represents his own personal approach to responding to human rights. Why then was he selected to represent the BDS movement against only Israel? Because none of the actual leaders of the BDS movement, including Omar Baghdadi, the leader of the movement, are willing to debate me or to appear on the stage or the podium with me. That is the true face of BDS, not what you will be hearing today. Here is the official statement of the Palestinian Campaign for Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, launched by Barghouti, the same man who launched the BDS movement. Cultural events involving Palestinians on the one side and Israelis on the other that are based on the false premise of symmetry between oppressor and oppressed, etc., are intellectually dishonest, morally reprehensible forms of normalization and ought to be boycotted, which is why he will not speak on the same podium with me. He continues, examples include events that are designed to bring together Palestinians, Arabs, and Israelis so that they can present their respective narratives or perspectives or to work toward reconciliation. He doesn't want anybody to work toward reconciliation with or without addressing the root causes of injustice and the requirements of justice. So it's not surprising, therefore, that the BDS movement is antagonistic to peace and against peace in the Middle East and against the two-state solution. After all, if the BDS movement is against a debate with me, how can they favor a negotiated resolution to the Middle East? The BDS movement is against negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians. And I think that the BDS movement incentivizes the Palestinian leadership not to continue to engage in negotiations. Not surprisingly, President Abbas just yesterday said, negotiations are useless. What we need is pressure, pressure, pressure. And so I think the BDS movement is inconsistent with a negotiated two-state solution. Finally, I challenge my distinguished opponent to name one country in history that has faced threats comparable to those faced by Israel, that has a better record of human rights, has complied more with the rule of law, and has tried harder to reduce civilian casualties. I submit he will not be able to name any such nation. I urge you to vote against the BDS movement and to vote for a negotiated, compromised peace between Israel and the Palestinians and the two-state solution that the BDS movement is opposed to. Thank you very much.
Damn, he got us.
Yeah.
You know,
sorry, I'm just trying to. I'm still trying to get that like flood of whataboutism that we just heard. Like I'm still kind of trying to spit out like spare bits of whataboutery that got in my mouth during all of that. But
that snow became a blizzard there.
Yeah. I mean, very first thought, like when I hear stuff like this, the question is always, oh, hey, what about this country or that country? I don't know, Russia or Armenia, mention some others. And, I think in some cases, obviously, you have to judge it case by case, but like in some cases, these other situations really are pretty bad. But my question is always, okay, but do you actually want me to be more mad about those places, or do you just want me to be less mad about Israel?
Yeah, that's great. I like that. I mean, to me, the short ripcord there is like, yeah, but I'm not paying that country. I'm not paying Azerbaijan to occupy Nagorno-Karabakh. I don't pay them. Like they have their own. Let's see, we give them a lot of weapons. Yes, that's great. But like it's just we're giving billions of dollars to, and they do ethnic cleansing, and we give them way more. I mean, to me, wall to wall, what Dershowitz is alighting here is ethnic cleansing, just from the beginning to the end of that. The Palestinians. So they went right after Israel after the UN partition. Like Israel took an enormous amount of land beyond the already bizarrely generous UN partition plan, mostly influenced, by all the UK foreign office at that time, which was very, pro the establishment of the Jewish homeland. But then, that's what starts that military confrontation and the Palestinian refusal to accept it. Like if some Muslims somehow were able to, some Muslim power were able to midwife the creation of a Muslim country between France and Germany and push the French and German citizens who've lived there for generations out of the territory to do it, like the European countries would all declare war on that new state. I mean, do we want to pretend that wouldn't happen if China created a new state here on the West Coast? Like, we're just going to cleanse everyone out of here and put this in. Like, you go to war with them. Like, any country would do that. And then all the way through with today, like, why is it that BDS singles out Israel, the only Jewish state, and why is it all these other countries aren't included? They're mostly not ethnic cleansing. Mostly it's it's just military occupation, invasions and attacks, and other crimes against humanity, which are bad enough. But it's the ethnic cleansing, like that's a relatively limited number of cases compared to straight on like conventional occupation. Like at any point, Dershowitz, you could recognize this stuff. I mean, you're in the UK, so you're out of your country, so you're briefly not on ethnically cleansed soil. Like you should be breathing the air of a place where that didn't happen,
Well,
so that's the thing that differentiates Israel. It's just that fucking continuous settlement building.
Yeah. I mean, most British people are descended from people who were forcibly removed from their land, but not because their ethnicity, just because the aristocrats realized that they could like exploit it more profitably if they got the peasants to leave.
Yeah, just from enclosure rather than like a foreign ethnic entity coming in. It's true. Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, that's that's a key for everything that got said.
Yeah, I mean, it's just all kind of like. Yeah, I mean, this really is. I mean, it's funny because, I used the word whataboutism earlier, and somebody asked about it in the chat, and I would say it's funny. I even think this term is often overused. It's like anytime somebody's like making a comparison between two things, it's like, oh, you're doing whataboutism, right? It's like, well, but the original sort of thing of whataboutism is sort of saying, well, this country is doing this. Well, what about that other country that did this other thing, as a way of not talking about the first one, right? So
let's push the spotlight in that old direction there.
Yeah,
that's a misused logical fallacy claim. You should write a sequel to give them an argument and put that one in there.
Yeah,
that's
totally right. Yeah, it's Tukokwe, right, and you also, so like. When he brings up the all of the Jews who had to flee from various Middle Eastern countries, fair enough. But is the conclusion that therefore what Israel did was fine and they shouldn't have to let refugees come back? Or is the conclusion that there are a bunch of other countries that have also committed human rights violations and that's also bad? Right? Like, because you can... you can say the second one, right? Like if I don't know how many, Mizrahi Israelis are like itching to return to Syria, but I suspect relatively few of them. But if any of them are, Syria should let them come back. Absolutely, right? This is no question. I mean, I mean, there are. Spain actually has return for for the descendants of Spanish Jews who fled from the Inquisition, which I think is great, right? You should. Like, this is the idea that the idea that what like various Arab countries do justifies anything that Israel does kind of doesn't make sense on its face, which is why Dershowitz isn't quite saying that it justifies it. He's just like, hey, look over there. Look, talk about that, right? Don't talk about this stuff. Talk about that stuff. And, it's really striking too, that, I assume that when Tatchell starts up, he's probably going to talk about the parallel with the boycott campaign against South Africa in the 1980s. But,
like there's a whole history of doing these in these exact tactics, in these exact settings. Everyone's like, oh, well, that's really ugly racism. You're like that. Everyone's famous for getting a relatively warm reception by campus demonstration standards. My God, it's like, and after all, we could also say specifically, like Israel and South Africa spent, South Africa's pariah period as allies, all the way up to their nuclear program, which remains, denied, just like Israel's continuing nuclear program is. But I mean, it's just incredible. To me, the best part, of course, is that as Dershowitz gets bored with making his talking points and starts feeling the inner insecurity, starts talking about himself. That's why the BDS movement's scared to come here and stand on the stage and debate me. So they sent a sympathetic supporter of the movement over. Oh, why isn't it some person who I allege to be the founder of BDS? He says all these ugly things. Why do I have the feeling if I looked into it, I'd find that it was like a group of people that sort of originated the idea? Why am I suspicious? Like, oh, I met that one guy who said embarrassing things. Like, just it's pretty rough, but just watching Dershowitz's ego take back over, like everyone's afraid to debate me and my power.
Well, look, Mr. Barghouti, if you're watching this, you should absolutely debate Alan Dershowitz. This is, as many people as possible should do that, because again, the more people get to see this guy as the face of the Israeli government and its apologists in the West, again, that is exactly the company that I wanted them to be in, right? That Klaus von Bülow, O.J. Simpson, Benjamin Netanyahu, like, to the extent that they are all represented by the same council.
Harvey Weinstein's defense team, Jeffrey Epstein's defense team. Like, it's just, there's more. I was looking at beforehand. I was like, give me a break. So yeah, he's the perfect face for this movement, I feel, for the American Zionists. That is the
exactly. That's absolutely yes. So I do. I don't know how scared this man actually is of Dershowitz, but if he's like, oh, the American man said he wanted me to be, oh, sure, I guess. Like, but yes, he certainly shouldn't be. He should absolutely talk to Dershowitz. But like, when the boycott campaign was happening against South Africa in the 80s, yes, during that period of very close South African-Israeli alliance, there was a very...
They were pariahs. Like, the parallels are just like sitting right there. There's no way this gentleman will let that get away from us. Probably everything we're saying now, he'll...
I expect. But like, at that time, a very common right-wing talking point was, why are these people just talking about, why are they just going after South Africa? What about all these other countries, in sub-Saharan Africa that have committed human rights violations? Why is South Africa getting all the hate? And again, I think that, like, I obviously agree with the sort of basic Chomsky point you made earlier, which is that our primary responsibility is to oppose the crimes that we could conceivably do something about. Exactly. It's like, oh, why don't you hold protests against Hamas? To do what? To have my...
I don't like them, and now they know. Why are you demonstrating against Russia? Because it's the opposite of what you can control.
That's like, I'm not going to...
Us, they say, he's trying to take people off the domestic issue, but then they can't complete that circle and see us doing it here.
Yeah, the point of a protest is to influence government policy. My government already does not support Hamas. So, mission accomplished. Didn't even have to do anything. But Whereas Israel is getting a tremendous amount of armament and funding and diplomatic cover for the United States. And not only is it conceivable that that speaking out against that could actually influence government policy, I think that as of this conversation, there's pretty specific evidence that it has. Like in the last day or two, Biden has finally said, I mean, it's so half-assed, but he's finally said, like, okay, if you're going to go into the population center in Rafah, the last place that you already drove everybody after you ordered them out of all the other parts of Gaza, the last refuge for Palestinian civilians in Gaza, if you go into the population center of Rafah, those guns blazing, I guess we're going to hold back the 2,000-pound bombs. And
it will slow walk the blockbuster bomb. Like, wow, Biden, holy shit, having a Gandhi moment here. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I'm underwhelmed. But that said, like, look, would he have done that if not for
some people will live. Some people will live.
Yeah, some people will live because he did that, and I absolutely don't think he would have done that if he wasn't feeling the heat from the protests. You know, grabbing the headlines every single day, the massive uncommitted votes in states that he needs to win, the fact that, you know, at a certain point he might get sick of being referred to as Genocide Joe. Like if all of this stuff has some kind of effect, then, you know, then it's like, yeah, good, great, right? This is like, yeah, that's a thing we could impact, right? That as Americans, we could actually have some influence on U.S. foreign policy, whereas, of course, we have zero influence on Russian foreign policy or Azerbaijani foreign policy, or, you know, you know, what Hamas does or doesn't do, any of this stuff, right? You know, none of that stuff is under the control of American citizens. You know, even in the extremely limited way that, you know, that we can exert some kind of pressure on U.S. foreign policy. But yeah, I obviously think that the thing that's, you know, to the extent that we can move the needle of that, that's obviously what we should focus on. But also, like, look, there might be other cases in which the U.S. is supporting, you know, really serious crimes, and so as Americans, we should be more focused on that one too. But again, my question is, you know, is what people really want when they're doing all this, what about this country, what about that country, to get people to expand what they're doing and start protesting these other injustices? Or is what they really want to get them to feel embarrassed about the inconsistencies, just shut up about Israel? Right? I'm pretty sure it's
at the beginning. Yeah, that is a great.
Like,
yeah, that's why join my League of Peace. Like, no, it's to stop making me feel bad for waving the flag of a fairly evil regime. Stop it, please.
Yeah,
that's a great point. It's like, you don't want equality. You just want me to shut up about this.
Yeah.
Like
so it's like, look, I think, for example, Saudi Arabia, I mean, at this point, they've pretty much lost the war in Yemen, but like when that was going on, right? I mean, that's a comparable thing on all counts. And, you know, it's like, I will point out, it's not like the American left didn't object to that at all. In fact, Bernie Sanders, you know, led a, you know, bipartisan effort to cut off the funding for it. But, you know, if you want me to be like more mad about Saudi Arabia, I'm totally open to that. Right. Like, but if you want me to be less mad about Israel forcing millions of Gazans to leave their homes at gunpoint and, you know, killing like at least a few times as many civilians in 7 months than like Russia has killed in all of Ukraine in the last 2.5 years, you know, then it's like, no, I'm still going to get mad about that. Right. I'm open to being mad about other things also. I'll hear you out on that. But like, I am as a baseline going to be mad about that thing.
Yeah. Yeah, which side is filling people with bullets and bomb fragments that come from my country? Like, again, like, not just to, you know, a lot of good angles to chop down this train here.
Yeah, no, yeah, and I would also just say that I'm very confused about this thing, that this rhetorical flourish that people like Dershowitz do so much when they're like, "Oh, the world's only Jewish nation state." It's like, well, help me out here. Why is that relevant? Right? Like what? Like South Africa was the world's only Afrikaner state. Like, that's what. Why is it important that it's the only one, right? I mean, if you think like, I mean, you wouldn't know it from Dershowitz's presentation, by the way, but I looked it up to make sure that I was remembering this correctly while he was talking. And the stated goals of BDS, the demands of the BDS movement, are to. There are three of them. They want to philosophy and goals. One is ending the occupation of all Arab lands occupied in 1967, dismantling the wall. Second is recognizing the fundamental rights of Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel to full equality. And the third is the right of return of Palestinian refugees. And, I find it pretty telling that he didn't spell any of that out, right? He was just like, they're extremists. They're extreme, right? It's like, okay, well, why not talk about the specific things that they want and why those are bad things to want, But yeah, I guess, all right, let's say, so I guess what he's really objecting to maybe is the one about the right of return for refugees, because if you let too many, Arabs be citizens of the state, then it would lose its, Jewish character. That's like roughly the idea. Say, oh, well, because it's the world's only Jewish state. And I always wonder about this. I mean, this is like, I said something about this in my talk at Princeton, but it's like, okay, if you say, like, imagine that the United States was set up as a white Christian state. So we had, we only let, we let any white Christian from anywhere in the world immigrate to the United States, severely restricted immigration to everywhere else, et cetera, fill out the picture, right? And let's say every other historically white Christian state of the world had just become a multiracial democracy at that point. Would you be like, well, the U.S. has to stay this way because it's the world's only white Christian state? Or would you be like, yeah, great, we're almost done, only one left to go, right? Like,
great, we got it down to one. Wow.
Yeah. Like, why is that relevant? That's the only one. I've never understood that. It's like, yeah, obviously, you have to have like a couple of ethno states. I mean, that'd be really bad if you didn't have that.
Oh God, I can't imagine any other priority in society than to maintain homogenous blocks of ethnic types. I mean, what could be more important than that? Nothing,
Yeah. And also, by the way, it's, not for nothing, this idea that it's like really important that you have at least one Jewish state, it's like, well, okay, again, why? Right? Is it because it's like Jewish people are going to be safer? Because
that's the Biden argument.
Yes,
without Israel, they will be safe anywhere, but they know they can go to Israel, so they're safe.
Yeah, which is awesome because he's the president of the United States and he's insinuating that Jewish people aren't safe in the United States.
Yes, that is the implication there. It would seem like,
but it's like, look, where are you more likely to be killed because of your ethnic identity as a Jewish person? Israel or the United States? Like, I mean, I
think you're going to be safer in Brooklyn. I really feel that.
Yes, you're going to be significantly safer in Brooklyn. Like, this is, it turns out that multi-ethnic democracies where you don't have prolonged cycles of intracommunal violence are actually much better bets for everybody's safety. So, this is, this is so crazy to me. And this is why I remember saying this a little while back, that it's like, in a certain sense, nothing makes me feel more patriotic than thinking about Israel, not in the sense that I'm like real proud that my government is sending them bombs and guns to kill people in Gaza. But in the sense that I'm enormously grateful that, when it was time for the Jewish side of my family to, get the fuck out of the Russian Empire, they came here instead. This is just such a, is just such a fucking better way to set up a society. I mean, the U.S. has 1,000 problems, but it's like, but being like a normal democracy where nobody has to like carry around an identity card saying what your like ethnic group is.
We spend a lot of time trashing this country and its laundry list of crippling problems, but you could do worse is completely true. I mean, yes, you'd have better health insurance, and so on.
Yeah. No, that's true. That's true.
Unless you're in the wrong place at the wrong time and Gaza finally explodes while you're standing around at a music festival near there. I mean, it is. Yeah. As you said, like you more safety just as a gun violence susceptible American than you would place where you built it recently by ethnically cleansing everyone within living memory.
Yeah, I mean, in the last week, I believe we were talking about Euron Brooks' question about, if there was an open border between Sweden and the U.S., where the traffic would go. And, we were both pretty sure it'd go to Sweden. So it's like,
I would be in the traffic. That is like, I would be fine.
So it's like, yes, I would prefer, given the three choices, the Swedish model where you have far less poverty and far less gun violence is obviously better than the American model. But American model by yes, Israel, like most other developed countries, is beating us on healthcare. But we
gotta take our lumps from affair. But we had Barack Obama. I mean, this is a cheap, sloppy comparison, but we had Obama. Where's the Palestinian prime minister? I mean, that is.
Oh my God. No,
that is further from happening than anything ever is. Ever. Like that is just. I mean, you can imagine such a thing.
No, totally unimaginable. Yeah. So, all right. Well, let's see our other fighter.
All right, go get him.
I thank Professor Dershowitz. Now look to Mr. Peter Tatchell for his initial submissions.
I'd like to thank Professor Dershowitz for his contribution and to all of you for joining us here tonight to discuss this very important issue. My starting point is that it is with a heavy heart that I support the boycott, disinvestment, and sanctions movement. For me, it is a last resort. I am here to debate the principle. There is a diverse BDS movement. Different people within it have different perspectives. But I want to defend the principle of BDS, not necessarily the views of particular leaders or officials within it. I said a heavy heart because all the other options have failed. All the other options have failed to get Israel to end its occupation. Diplomacy has failed, negotiations have failed, armed struggle has failed. What we have as an alternative is BDS, a peaceful, non-violent attempt to secure a Palestinian homeland. Specifically, to pressure Israel to withdraw from the territories it seized in 1967, to pull out of West Bank settlements, to dismantle the separation wall, to end illegal discrimination and other forms of discrimination against Arabs living in Israel, and to secure the right of return for Palestinians who are forced out after 1948. For me, Israel's occupation is the root cause of the conflict. And until that occupation is ended, there is very little chance of peace. Now, in all my 48 years of human rights activism, I have only seen continuous, successive Israeli expansionism and colonization. From 1948 onwards, Israel has progressively seized more and more Palestinian land. Here is a map which gives you an illustration of how the land grab has continued. In this corner here, it shows what the situation was in 1946. The dark areas are Palestinian, the light areas are Israeli. You can see that in 1946, the vast majority of that land was occupied by Palestinian people. On this side, you can see the situation today. Nearly all the land in white is occupied by Israel. The Palestinian portions are just a tiny, tiny proportion. This map, we can have debates about the precise details of it, but this map shows in essence the land grab that Israel has pursued over the last 7 decades. Israelis have been forcing out Palestinians from land that they occupied and lived in for 7 decades. And this land grab is still continuing today, with over 500,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank and Arab East Jerusalem. These settlements are a deliberate attempt to undermine the peace process. Israel knows it, the world knows it. If you keep on seizing other people's land, and these new settlements are still continuing right now as we speak, the prospect of peace and a settlement evaporate. Some people say dialogue and building bridges is better than BDS, a better path to peace. Well, this would be true if it worked. But decades of dialogue and bridge building have not worked. The prospects for voluntary concessions by Israel are now almost zero. Israeli politicians and public opinion have shifted to the right and towards a more hardline rejectionist position. So, very sadly, I must conclude that there is no hope of Israel, by its own volition, withdrawing from the occupied territories and settlement. And you may say, well, isn't this, a two-sided equation? Well, I've got to say to you that as the occupying power, with the biggest economy and military, and with nuclear weapons, Israel has the moral responsibility to take the lead. Take the lead in ending the occupation that is the main cause of the conflict and stalemate. I don't think it's reasonable to expect the victims of occupation to concede to their occupiers. When Israel refuses to budge, when it offers no prospect of budging, BDS is a very measured, responsible, and reasonable reaction. It's a reaction to decades of occupation where no progress has been made. BDS is also not against individuals, it's against Israeli state and institutions. The key elements to BDS that I support are a halt to all international aid and trade with Israel, including military aid and weapons sales, targeted sanctions against Israel's political and military leaders, a consumer boycott of Israeli produce, especially produce from Israeli West Bank settlements. These, to me, are the core elements of what a BDS campaign should be and which most supporters subscribe to. Personally speaking, I support exactly the same tactics against all tyrannies and all occupations everywhere, against Pakistan's occupation of Balochistan, against Iran's occupation of Al-Awaz and Balochistan, of Indonesia's occupation of West Papua, of Morocco's occupation of the Western Sahara, and so on and so on. There is consistency, and for those who are not consistent, that does not invalidate the principle of BDS. It just invalidates their particular moral position. For Palestinians, BDS is a viable alternative to war, and it's more effective. I'm on long record as condemning attacks upon Israeli civilians just as much as I oppose attacks upon Palestinian civilians. But those Palestinian rocket attacks and suicide bombings, they are military failures. They are not going to change the situation. BDS is the peaceful way, the non-violent way that we can move things forward. And BDS is in the tradition of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King, who used these tactics to challenge injustice. It's the same principle, the same tactic. Peaceful pressure is better than military pressure. Peaceful pressure of BDS is infinitely better than rockets and suicide bombers and stabbers. I urge you to support BDS as one path towards peace. Thank you.
Pretty formidable, it's very, very calm. Didn't go after everything that Dershowitz raised, calm, on message. There's a responsible answer. It's the peaceful approach. Just very thoughtful. Anyone can listen to this and think like, well, there's a thoughtful position here. And he explains, there's other occupations. We're against those too. I mean, I would have gone harder on the ethnic cleansing specificity, but and again, he's from the UK, he's not American. I guess it's a somewhat different support relationship there. So naturally, he wouldn't raise that as directly as we would. But pretty good, very, it's very thoughtful. Has a dry UK style, very Hogwarts.
Yeah, I mean, what I liked about this, especially toward the end, was that he was really bringing out the sort of, and really at both the beginning and the end of his presentation, he was really bringing out the like, okay, look, you have this sort of fundamental core of the situation that, you have people who are ethnically cleansed in 1948 who, they and their families, have been often sitting in refugee camps in many cases for, 76 years, at this point. You have millions of Palestinians who in the West Bank and Gaza who've been, rightsless, stateless, non-citizen subjects of Israel for 57 years since 1967. And, so these are really grave injustices. And, BDS is really the sort of gentlest possible strategy for opposing that, right? That this is like, because it's like, look, either you just don't want anybody to do anything to push back against what's happened to the Palestinians, or it looks like this is the nicest possible option, right? Like this is, we're not talking about bombs, guns, this is just like literally just a nonviolent economic boycott.
Indeed. And I like, and I like too, though, that when he makes that point, he specifically says it's an alternative to violence, but he also says violent resistance failed. It's Israel. It's got a NATO military. It's going to crush you and kill you and recruit spies. I mean, it's very different. Never say never, but that's, the most difficult battle. It's like, hey, let's do this instead. It's better.
Yeah, which is the same reason that I think he was rightly pushing back against the idea that's like, oh, well, see, there's all this responsibility spread out everywhere. It's like, yeah, okay. But also Israel is an actual nation state with a giant military and nukes and a, thriving economy and right, and it also, of course, controls all the territory, from the river to the sea, which is a phrase that's very offensive to say when you suggest that there's a problem there. But
yes. If you're a Likudnik, you could just put it in a policy document, and people go, they're uncompromising.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, there's also the position of, as I like to put it, the Likud and its armed wing, the IDF, Uh, but but yeah, I mean, this is like, as a matter of fact, Israel has controlled everything from the river to the sea for 57 years.
Yeah, they actually.
Yeah, like that's just the, you know, like that's not a hypothetical. That's like an actually existing fact in the world, that that it has controlled all this territory for all this time. And so, yeah, I mean, this is like, you know, if you're asking what party here has by far the most power to change the situation, it would maybe be the one that controls everything.
Yeah, it's always but if you Arabs could, you'd subjugate us. Yeah, but you did subjugate us, so it's always but you're just looking for a chance to reverse it. Well, you're the one who's holding the gun. Like, it's you're the one with the NATO military, Western Club of Nations, and doing ongoing ethnic cleansing.
If you could take this gun away from me, you'd be pointing at me right now. Yeah, like,
you know, that really always is the liberal justification for state violence. Like, that's, you know, the guy, you know, the Rodney King cops, like when they're on the stand, you know, it's 12 cops standing around a single unarmed black guy beating him with giant truncheons. When they're on the stand, it's, I was scared to death. He was about to get up and take my gun from me, and then I guess kill all of us. That's what he said on stand. I was scared he was about to get up, and then of course the white jury is like, I'd be scared of a black guy too, and they, you know, acquitted all those cops. Yeah. But that's the thing. And every time it's, you know, prison guards, you know, you beat him and you yell, "Stop fighting! He's attacking me!" Oh, I knocked all of his teeth out in the course of his attacking.
Yeah, look, I mean, this is. Yeah, I mean, I tend to assume that every time I ever see somebody arrested for assaulting a police officer, you know, don't get me wrong, I know that sometimes that happens, but I would tend to assume a good 995 or so out of 1,000 times what that actually means is being assaulted by one.
Yeah, I screamed in your face, "Get on the ground," and you were like, "What the fuck?" And so I slammed you into the wall. Yeah, assaulting an officer. He assaulted my fist with his face area. That was ow.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's not like a matter of, like, you know, I don't know, you know, hating cops or thinking they're always the wrong or whatever. That's just like, you know, I think it's a realistic assessment of what the incentives are of a situation where you have the power where it is, and, you know, people are going to act on that in the way that they are. But yeah, I think that, you know, I also like his point about consistency. I mean, I would have maybe drawn it out a little bit more than he did, and said this, which is, like, to the point earlier, you know, after he did the nice thing where he was like, he listed off a bunch of other occupations, and I agree, some of these cases are probably not quite comparable, you know, but also after he drew them all out, it was like, yeah, look, sure, I'd be in favor of using similar tactics in all these cases. That, you know, he didn't, that the way I would have completed that thought, right, when he said, okay, some people are inconsistent, but there's a consistent position here that's available, is like, yeah, okay, some people are inconsistent, sure, fine. But when you said that somebody is inconsistent, you haven't said yet what the right position would be. Only that
you're just insulting, or, you know, you're just disparaging one specific person. That's, you know, so like, well, you said this and this, but like, well, what's the point? Like, can we just talk about what the correct position is rather than raking whomever over the coals for inconsistency?
Yeah, I mean, because when you find out that you're inconsistent, that, you know, that's like, okay, so I think two things that can't both be true. Fair enough. But that by itself doesn't tell you which one you should pick, right? Like, this is like, so, okay, if these two things can't both be true, then I've got to stop believing both of them, but there's still this choice available about which one I'm going to stop believing. So it's like, let's say they're inconsistent. It's like, fine, but do we want to resolve this inconsistency in the direction of giving more human rights violators a pass? Or do we want to resolve it in the opposite direction by saying,
surely.
Like,
I guess you're right. We shouldn't have any standards. Wow, you know, I didn't think about it that way. Yeah, surely the point is that we should hold you to the standard. Aren't you supposed to be this great Westernish tradition? Why aren't you holding yourself to a higher standard? You know, it seems like that would be
which is by the way, like the original phrase before whataboutism, if you look at the really old stuff, so I think whataboutery was coined during the Troubles in Northern Ireland, which is kind of what became whataboutism. So it's like the IRA did this. Well, what about the Brits did this and that, the other thing? But the original thing was something people would say when they were sort of rolling their eyes at Soviet propaganda, which was the original phrase, look this up, was, and yet you are lynching Negroes, which, so it's like, oh, here you are, complaining about all your stuff, and yet you are lynching Negroes. And, look, it might not excuse what the Soviet Union did in Czechoslovakia or whatever, but also to your point about higher standards, pretty sure that part of the reason that we got integration in the U.S. was precisely to deprive the Soviets of that talking point. Right? That it's like, oh, you fucking hicks are making us look bad on the world stage, right? Like, that's, so, to the extent that it led to no longer lynching Negroes, that does strike me as a good thing.
Yeah, like clearly these are improvements there. But I like that. I think he did really well with that also. And then just again referring all this a number of times specifically, like it's a land grab. One of the oldest things that ever happens among humanity is pushing out someone to take their land away. Like that's good, not just to say ethnic cleansing every time with this, but specifically like it's in a way even more crass because a lot of people aren't driven necessarily by their racial antipathies to see the opportunity to take the Japanese property in the 40s or whatever. Land grab's a great thing to have in the mix anytime it's a subject like this. A good statement of the goals, withdrawal to the UN borders and the settlements, right of return. I mean,
yeah.
And with MLK and Gandhi, who did boycotts, what was that thing that MLK always did? Oh, you're targeting the South, the only home for Southern people.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
we see you.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's yeah, I mean, like this is I think this was really strong. And what I was going to say is I would really like it. I really liked that he actually listed off the goals of BDS there, because I think like if you're going to have an intelligent conversation about BDS, it's like, okay, there are two ways you could criticize it. One is this is a bad way of achieving the goals, in which case, I think the question that Tatchell is raising here about, okay, well, tell me about the good way, right, is because this really, again, does seem like the nicest possible way to do this. Seems like a fair response. But sure. And like, I also like, by the way, that he was like, look, I support targeted whatever. Cause it's like, I think probably the best criticism I've ever heard of PDS. There's this Israeli podcaster I was arguing about this with like a couple weeks ago. And he, I think the most fair point he made was like, well, a lot of times people end up like arguing about like boycotting some like, I don't know, Israeli improv theater troupe or something, because that's kind of what they can get to, because they have no, there's not a lot they can do about like Lockheed Martin selling guns to the IDF. And it's like, what, that's a fair point. But like he also, I think
that's the best criticism I've heard of it. Like that's. Yeah.
And like, Tatchell, I think also did address that a little bit with you. It's like, look, here's the kind of BDS that I'm most enthusiastic about, sort of targeted. And like, he goes into like sort of specific things that it makes sense to boycott. But then it's like, so, okay, either you disapprove of the tactic or you disapprove of the goals. And yeah, it would be really nice to make Dershowitz be like, yeah, okay, Tatchell just told you the 3 goals. Which of these is bad? And why is it bad? Like, why is this a bad goal to have? Which one of these is a bad goal? In fact, one of these you claim to be in favor of.
Yeah, Mr. Pro-Palestine. Yeah, exactly. And so that's what I assume is going to happen now is, like, after that, I think Dershowitz will go back to what he was doing at the end of his first bit, where he's like, oh, we gave a great deal in the 90s, Oslo. You guys get to appoint 3 mayors, and we can come in whenever we want. And we control the highways, and you have no military, and maybe we'll train some of your people to beat you up when we can't be bothered.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
assume that's what this is, because that's all this like, no, I'm pro-Palestine. And again, of course, also, there's a great thing from the beginning. Like, this is BDS will fuck up the peace process. That is one argument that they are not going to be able to use anymore. Like, oh, no,
Yeah.
oh, no, the healthy peace process will be jeopardized.
Yeah, no, because that was going so well. Yes. BDS would not have happened in the first place if it wasn't obvious that, if like that wasn't totally moribund long before the original boycott call came out in the first place. Now, of course, the current Israeli government could not be more explicit about the fact that their position is that there will never, under any circumstances, be a Palestinian state.
Yeah, they say it all the time. I don't understand how this is. I mean, I guess this does date this debate a little. I kind of doubt that even Dershowitz now would say, no, there's still a good faith offer on the table. No. Who knows? But
yeah, clearly not. I mean, this is, and you're also totally right that like none of the offers. I mean, there's never been a point when any Israeli government was willing to actually consider like a real two-state settlement, where when I say real, I mean like, okay,
two real states, like governments with militaries and sovereignty over their territory.
Exactly, right? Like not some kind of weird demilitarized semi-state that's like, pockmarked by blocks of annexed settlements and Israeli sold roads, patrolled by Israeli soldiers, which is like the kind of thing that was actually on the table in, Camp David and, is really like no Israeli government, has really considered going further than that. Certainly not to what people are thinking of when they hear two-state solution, which is Israel withdraws all the way to the pre-1967 borders and allows the creation in the remaining 22% of the original country of a real Palestinian state with like a Palestinian army and a Palestinian navy, right? That's never been on the table. But, and again, it's very hard. This is also what drives me crazy, because it's like, look, as a normative issue, I would prefer, there's currently one state from the river to the sea with millions of people who are residents of that state denied all sorts of basic democratic and human rights. My first choice normatively would just be to, extend equality to everybody who lives there and just have a real multi-ethnic democracy. But if that's too utopian and you say, oh no, because we want a two-state solution, because this is like what Dershowitz did is something I see a lot. People, who are basically defenders of the Israeli state and everything that it does, be like, oh no, don't get me wrong, I don't like the settlements. I wish there could be a two-state solution. It's like, okay, so you want Israel to grant something that no Israeli government has ever come close to considering acceding to, and in the process evacuate like hundreds of thousands of settlers. Would be incredibly difficult. So why do you think they would do that? Like what's your plan to pressure them to make concessions on that level if you think even an economic boycott is going too far?
Yeah, well, of course, Ben. The answer is how you make them do it is through peace processes.
Oh, yeah, sure. I keep forgetting.
Through peaceful processes, you make a process of peace, and it's processed. So it's low nutrients, but it's still good. Yeah, pretty, man. Yeah, like you say, what is the alternative? You say you're against the settlements. Okay. Maybe he'll surprise us, but my ears are wide open for any alternative for how you anticipate. Yeah. Remember, settlements mean ethnic cleansing. Again, that means pushing out residents. These places have people who live in them, and it's arid. Yeah. It's a hurting economy in a lot of the West Bank, for example. And so you push these people off, and you build some nice European-y suburbs on the top of the hill overlooking these poor Arabs, and you put in like some EU standard housing.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like there was just a bunch of land on the West Bank. I mean, none of this territory is very big, right? It's not like there was just a bunch of land in the West Bank that nobody was using, and it's like
when it was the British Palestinian Mandate, it had an Arab population. It was documented at that time, so Britain could tax them. This is their imperial their mandate subjects, whatever.
Yeah.
Like it's.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like this is, and yeah, they like you have. Like, yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of pushing people out, even the initial stuff, even if nobody's been pushed out for the initial settlement, then the inevitable thing is that it's like, oh, there's a flare up of tensions. So for security purposes, we're going to have to extend the perimeter outside of it, and burn down the orchard that was surrounding it,
Yes.
So it's like this sort of like, oh, see, I disapprove of the settlements. I want a two-state solution. It's like, do you really? Because the settlements have been continuously expanded and expanded and expanded for all this time. And it's really, really, really hard to see what would make like a scenario where Israel would reverse course dramatically enough to abandon the settlements and allow retreat to the 1967 borders.
Yeah, if you're against settlements this way, this is some slow walking dealing with them, because they grow the longer we let this go. Remember the one time the only time, like whenever Israel has to withdraw from any territory, like Gaza in 2006 or whenever that was, and of course the Sinai after the 73 war, it's just like, I cannot believe that once again our people are being victimized. We had to give up this very large chunk of land we occupied a year ago. Like when those moments happen, like the amount of crying on camera is stupendous. So what would happen if the West Bank was evacuated of the illegal beyond the Green Line settlements? I shudder to come.
And yes, also, by the way, some spectacular whataboutery in the comments from Kevin said, spoken as if Arabs didn't relegate Jews to second-tier citizen status for centuries before eventually expelling them. Yes, various pre-modern Middle Eastern states did not follow my standards of democracy and human rights. That doesn't mean that what you want to claim is the only democracy in the Middle East we have to support, etc., gets a pass because medieval Arab countries didn't give equal rights to Jews. That was bad. And by the same principle, this is bad too.
I'm not aware of the United States giving billions of dollars every year to the Ottoman Empire. Like, I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, exactly. And if we develop a time portal and start sending fighter jets to the Ottoman military to help them oppress people throughout the Middle East, I will be against it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tatchell. Can I turn to Professor Dershowitz for your response to Mr. Tatchell?
Thank you. Of course, peaceful measures are better than war measures. Those are not the alternatives. The alternatives are for the Palestinians to come back to the negotiating table and to negotiate the kind of two-state solution they were offered in 2000, 2001 by President Clinton and Ehud Barak, the kind of two-state solution they were offered with the end of the occupation, the end of settlements by Ehud Olmert in 2007. Mr. Tatchell says the BDS movement essentially was a response to the election of hardline officials, but the BDS movement started well before that and started before Ehud Olmert offered peaceful resolution. In fact, the BDS movement tends to increase in its ferocity whenever Israel is in the process of trying to make generous peace offers, because you cannot distinguish the principle from the participants. That's the fundamental flaw in Mr. Tatchell's argument. You cannot distinguish a principle from those who practice it. He's wrong when he says a majority of those who support BDS support his BDS light movement. Really B, not so much D, and not S very much at all. You cannot make those kinds of distinctions. Where I agree completely. The occupation should be ended. There should be territorial swaps. There should be an end of the question is how to get there. The BDS movement will absolutely not work. It will disincentivize the Palestinians from coming to the negotiating table. It will make the Israelis put their back against the wall. Pressure now has to be put equally on the Palestinians and on the Israelis to come to the negotiating table. The rhetoric about victim and victimization, let's remember that the West Bank was occupied by Jordan between 48 and 67. The Gaza was occupied by Egypt. And when Israel ended its occupation of the Gaza, what happened? Is the occupation the root cause? Of course not. Why did Egypt attack Israel? Why has there been a genocidal direction against the Jewish state since 1948, well before the occupation. The occupation may be a contributing factor, but it is certainly not the root cause of the problems in the Middle East. If the BDS movement is desirous of peace, why won't its leaders debate me? Why won't its leaders encourage the Palestinians to sit down and negotiate with Israel? They are discouraging that. So I think.
Okay, I know it's way too early to stop for real, but I really just have to pause for a moment to treasure the amazing line we just heard. If the BDS leaders are serious about peace, why won't they debate me?
Probably because you're a giant bullshitting phony, Alan. You're a bad faith interlocutor. Like that it's
like just the level of narcissism here. It's like, well,
if they're so big, why won't they send their big man to fight me?
They have a, look, how could they possibly be serious about pursuing a peaceful settlement to the conflict in the Middle East if they won't debate my random American ass?
Wow. Some pompous Ivy Leaguer. We need to, oh my God, you guys, stop planning the Intifada. We've got to debate this stuck-up wife murderer defender
this is
in some kind of forum.
Yeah, this is like, I remember whenever a few years ago when everybody was fighting on the left about force the vote, David Feldman was on the Majority Report, and he was doing kind of a version of his reasonable centrist character, and he was like, yeah, I just don't know how we get Medicare for all until we solve this thing between Jimmy and the Young Turks. Like,
the real issue is rat beefs, of course.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's like, yeah, no, this makes perfect sense. It's like, look, you can tell me all you want that, that Benjamin Netanyahu wants normalization with Israel's neighbors, but I notice he hasn't come on this show and debated me, so I don't think he's serious.
Yeah, exactly. What about Netanyahu's silence in the face of Ben's challenges?
Exactly.
Volume, to use expressions that I hate in a row. Yeah, that's very embarrassing. Yeah, of course. Alan does have a point, because CNN producers are just dying to have Palestinians come on and give them many live air minutes to defend themselves. Look, I think we can all agree, every time Alan Dershowitz has been divided on national media, he tried really hard to get some Palestinian leadership or advocates on, and just every time he was just swatted down. I'm sure he at no point relishes the opportunity to speak unopposed about Palestinians on every piece of media that he encounters, except the occasional formal British boarding school debate format.
Mr. Tatchell is completely wrong when he says there's no other alternative. If there were no other alternative, if the issue before this House was, should the Palestinians engage in war or should they engage in BDS, I might join support for the BDS movement. But there is a third alternative, and that is for the Palestinian leaders to sit down and negotiate. And I think the BDS movement makes that far, far less likely. All other options have not failed. The other option succeeded in 2000, 2001. It succeeded in 2007. But the Palestinian leadership refused to accept that. I think Mr. Tatchell has the burden now of demonstrating that the Palestinians were right to reject the 2007 offer, that they were right to reject the 2000, 2001 offer. If he cannot satisfy that burden, then surely he must acknowledge that there are alternatives to the two extremes, the extremes of war and the extremes of BDS. The one area where I disagree with him is the security barrier. I do not believe Israel should dismantle its security barrier. That security barrier has saved thousands and thousands of lives, both Israeli and Palestinian. We all wish there weren't a need for a security barrier or checkpoints, but tragically, because of terrorism from Hamas, Hezbollah, and others, those security measures are necessary. If you had those problems in England, you would want security barriers to protect your loved ones as well. Thank you.
They have a security barrier. It's called the English Channel.
Yeah.
Works real good. Works real good. I just have two things to say about it.
And again, like the security barrier is talking about, right? This is like, it's not just like there was like a, some sort of naturally occurring gap that they put it in, right? I mean, this is all land that was stolen from Palestinian farmers. Like it's more, memory. Yeah, in very fucking recent living memory, right? Like, I mean, this is like, like 20 years ago kind of living memory, right? That he's talking about here, right? So it's like, it just, he's saying like, it's like, oh, what? I don't know. You don't like security barriers? What? You don't like security? Right. It's like, I think he's, missing why exactly, Palestinians might resent having, land that they were farming stolen to build a giant fucking Berlin Wall structure to further constrict their ability to, to move around within the country.
Yeah, like incredibly extensively so. Yeah, that's pretty rough. I mean, I think that's that's an open and shut thing. But to me, I feel like the real breakout thing we need to realize from the Dershowitz reply right here, as he said at the beginning, you cannot distinguish a principle from those who practice it. You just cannot evaluate a principle in a detached manner on its merits. You have to look and see who associated with it you can smear in some manner. And that's how you evaluate a principle when you're an attorney. So it's true. You can't separate a principle as defender. So I hate to say, I guess all Zionists then are supporters of sex offenders, as Mr. Dershowitz is. Like that's, if you can't separate his principle and the man, I'm just saying, I guess you guys were all big OJ supporters. Is that, I'm just learning a lot from
it's like especially absurd because he wants to be like, oh, no, see, actually existing BDS, leaders say this or that. So like anything they say, if you support the tactic, you're saying too, at the same time that he wants to be like, oh, I support Israel, though not the settlements or, obviously,
No.
It's like, well, hold on, which, if you can't separate the principle from
I can, you can't. I should have clarified that at the beginning. Sorry.
Yeah. Exactly.
Just one other thing that's annoying the shit out of me is that Dershowitz, I guess this is an artifact of his time overseas, but it's really annoying that he keeps saying negotiate, but he uses the British T, so he keeps saying negotiate. They won't sit down and negotiate. Stop it. I'm just having an irrational reaction to that. So,
yeah. Awesome. Yeah, no, fair enough. It's also like, look, I know this is stuff people have heard me say before, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but I really hate the way that he uses the phrase "the Palestinians," right? That like, oh, the Palestinians should have taken this or that offer. It's like, was there a vote? Like the Palestinians did that?
Yeah.
Like,
Arafat, famous, autocratic figure. I can't believe the Palestinians in their referendum on the Oslo Accords voted against it. Yeah, I can't believe it didn't happen. That's why you can't believe it.
Yeah, I mean, it's this attribution of collective agency to the Palestinians. It's like, remember, like when people say the Americans did this or the Israelis did that, that's a shorthand for like the American state did this or the Israeli state did that.
Yes, exactly.
There is no Palestinian state. So famously, right? So like you can say the PLO did this or that, or Hamas did this or that, Fatah, right? The Palestinian, National Council, right? You could say there are various Palestinian institutions you could say did this or that, but when you say the Palestinians did this or that, then you're talking about an entire ethnic group. It's really precisely equivalent to say the Jews did this or that, right? Like, and
that doesn't sound too good.
No, it doesn't, right?
I feel like
that's very bad, right? Like, I think if you hear somebody saying, "Oh, you know what the Jews did," I don't even need to hear the next sentence. I'm already checked out of the conversation.
We know where this is going, I guess.
Like, it's like, well, the Jews didn't do anything, right? There was no like, there's no mechanism for like every Jewish person in the world to, to make some sort of decision together. And similarly with the Palestinians, right? And the reason, and this is not just sort of finickiness about language, the reason this actually matters is that, what Dershowitz is saying is like, oh, well, the Palestinians should have made this or that different diplomatic decision if they had wanted, if they didn't want to live like this as like rightless non-citizen subjects. And putting aside the fact that his history is a dispatch from an alternate dimension, we all know that like nothing was on offer at Camp David or, in 2007, that was even close to a genuine two-state solution based on the 67 borders and allowing two real states with their own armies and navies and all that stuff. Nothing like that was ever on the table. In fact, Dershowitz himself gives away the game when he says all this stuff about land swaps, right? That's it's like, oh, well, we're not totally withdrawing back to the 67 borders and letting you have, the remaining 22% of historic Israel Palestine. But even putting that aside, right, even if we pretend for the sake of argument that a real Palestinian state was ever on the table, which it absolutely was not, it's not, say, oh, well, the Palestinians should have accepted this or that, and so it's like, oh, the Palestinians shouldn't even be promoting economic boycotts. Even that's too extreme. The Palestinians should just go back to the negotiating table. It's like, look, your position only sounds halfway defensible because you're playing this game about the Palestinians, right? The Palestinians turned down this offer at Camp David, the Palestinians did this or that. But the millions of people who are rightless, non-citizen subjects of Israel who, if they're accused of crimes, they're tried in military courts, not civilian courts. They obviously don't get to vote their rulers out of office. They have extremely limited rights to move around, even within the West Bank. Those people didn't get to decide any of this shit. And I think that actually matters a lot because, I think it really gets to the core moral intuition here, at least for me, which is just like, look, you don't get to rule over people without giving them rights in your state. There is nothing that could be true about Camp David or Taba or the Peel Commission, Plan 1937 or any of this stuff that would make it okay to spend 57 years keeping people as subjects but not citizens.
Yeah, and I think indeed, and I think just the final word on that subject specifically is, wasn't that the whole point of Zionism? Is that so many Jewish leaders and intellectuals in the early 20th century didn't want to be stateless. They didn't want to just be some minority that has to, whether successfully is in the U.S. or unsuccessfully, has to contend on a stateless manner. Like, we want a state, so we're going to deny you. We want the advantages of that. And you say the Israelis, like always, that means the Israeli state apparatus, the ministers' offices, and, the IDF movements. Yeah, the Palestinians means like that little clique of corrupt Palestinians whom we were feeling like speaking to in the Clinton era. The fact that, we know that Netanyahu and other Israeli government elements supported Hamas in Gaza as a way of undermining Fatah, shows how disingenuous it is to say, well, the Palestinians should have done. You were funding the most pissed off ones to undermine the mainstream secular leftist ones, so you wouldn't get a state. So you wouldn't have a state. Wasn't that the whole? Very
explicitly. There's like Ariel Sharon was prime minister when the disengagement in Gaza happened, which, by the way, credit where credit's due. Yeah, I really like Dave Smith's line about this. Crazy libertarian on domestic policy, but has some good insights on foreign policy. This is, talk like Dershowitz recycles all this bullshit about could have been, Singapore, if not for Hamas, doing what it did. It's like, well, saying you ended the occupation is like saying that if you withdraw the guards from the prison and then have them form like a tight perimeter around the prison with the guns pointed inside to make sure nobody leaves, right? Have you freed? Is it no longer a prison? Have you freed the prisoners, right? And he also, related to this, the line I always remember, this is from his debate with RFK Jr., which, by the way, I know it's in bad taste, but I've got to just take a moment to appreciate the latest medical news about that man. I often feel, let's put it this way. I can identify with what it must be like for that worm to have the last thing you did before you die was you had to adjust part of RFK's brain.
God.
I feel like in a lot of ways that's the experience of taking in a lot of discourse on social media. But
oh my God, it's like you're being executed. And your last cigarette is a menthol. That's just terrible.
Yeah. So Dave's line in the debate with RFK Jr. is Hamas is just the toughest gang in an Israeli prison. But actually it's worse than that, right? Because when Ariel Sharon did the disengagement from Gaza in 2005, 2006, there are all these people who were highly placed in his government who said very explicitly that the reason they did that was divide and conquer. That if Hamas got this foothold in Gaza, then that would divide. There wouldn't be unified Palestinian leadership between the West Bank and Gaza, and this would slow down the momentum for a Palestinian state. Netanyahu has said things like this, when he's bragging about all of his efforts to make sure there would never be a Palestinian state, as he very often does. Then to turn around and be like, well, shit, guys, sorry, this is really on you for having such extreme leaders. It's okay. Who propped up who and why here? I'm pretty sure Israel has no interest in having, moderate Palestinians who would have a harder time demonizing in charge of anything. But yeah, let's get the next part here before we go to the post game.
Mr. Tatchell, your response.
You may accept that the Palestinian negotiators have not always done the right thing or have missed opportunities. But that is in the past. We are now talking about the present, the here and now. You can't undo the mistakes of the past, whoever committed them. What we can do is move forward. The problem with Alan's argument is that there is no indication whatsoever that the Israeli side is prepared to offer a genuine new deal. There is no deal on the table now that comes anywhere near the basic fundamental demand, which is the withdrawal to the pre-1967 war borders and the dismantling of the West Bank settlements. Those are the core issues. Alan may deny it, but that is the fundamental issue that drives the Palestinians. You speak to any Palestinian, that's what they will constantly refer to. And of course, the fact that many of them were forced out of what became the state of Israel before, during, and after 1948. The Palestinians are not beyond criticism. I've said that. But we've got to move forward. And in the absence of any option that looks likely to work, BDS is one way to put pressure on Israel. As I said, I don't think it's fair or reasonable to expect those whose land is occupied, who are undergoing daily indignities, to expect them to make the first move. It's up to the big power, the power with the strength to make that move, the power that is doing the occupying. They are the power that have the responsibility to make the initiative. And I've got to say, it would be a very big gamble, but let's just say that Israel announced tomorrow that it would unilaterally withdraw from all those settlements on the West Bank, that it would recognize a Palestinian state, that it would fund Palestinian schools and hospitals, that it would end all the other indignities that Arab Israelis face. That would be a real game changer. It would give Israel moral authority and kudos in the world opinion. It would also, I think, meet with a favorable response by many ordinary Palestinians. There is a great deal of long-held mistrust. But I think a grand initiative like that by Israel would go a long way to help reassure Palestinians who, in their hearts, want exactly the same things as Israelis. They want peace, security, equality, jobs, housing, healthcare. There is a common interest, but it's being held back by the occupation. So my view is, it is absolutely vital that Israel makes that first move. And unless the occupation and those settlements in the West Bank, unless there's a withdrawal from those, I don't see any prospect of peace. And that is why, if Israel won't respond, it has to be pressured to respond. And BDS will work in the end. If enough people around the world refuse to buy Israeli produce, if enough governments refuse to trade or aid Israel, that will force change, and it will be a wake-up call, a long-needed wake-up call to those who are so intransigent today.
On that point.
So let me throw a challenge out to you, please. If the Israeli government, current government, were to say that we're prepared, they're prepared to sit down at the negotiating table with no preconditions and consider all of the things that you've just talked about and reoffer arrangements similar to those that were rejected by the Palestinians in 2000, 2001, and not responded to in 2007, would you then take the BDS off the table and renounce it?
It depends on what they said. I mean, as long as those 500,000 plus settlers remain on the West Bank in Palestinian land, how can there be a reasonable negotiation? Mm-hmm. I would have thought that withdrawing those settlements would have been a precondition
about and reoffer arrangements similar to those that were
for substantive change.
So let me ask you this question. They did withdraw the
thought that withdrawing those settlements would have been a precondition for substantive change.
So let me ask you this question. They did withdraw the settlers from the Gaza unilaterally withdrew the settlements from the Gaza, ended the occupation. The result was 15,000 rockets. If you're an Israeli now and you've looked at what happened when the occupation ended in Gaza, would you vote for a government that wanted to unilaterally withdraw without security guarantees and allow for rockets to be sent to the heartland of Israel? Because the West Bank, after all, is right next to Tel Aviv, right next to Jerusalem, not like the Gaza. How would you secure Israel's security, which I know you basically favor, based on the Gaza experiment, which failed?
Right, the Gaza experiment failed because there was a physical withdrawal, but Gaza was largely kept under siege and blockaded.
Not until 2 years later.
There wasn't a real... Gaza was not truly free. That's the first point. The second point is there was a substantial difference between the administration in Gaza and the administration on the West Bank. Hamas has a very different agenda from the Palestinian Authority. And sadly, I have to admit, because of Israel's intransigence, even on the West Bank, things are getting more rejectionist, which I deplore. But when you're faced with these new settlements happening all the time, it's not surprising that more and more Palestinians are getting less receptive to peace. But that's a gamble Israel has to take. And I can't guarantee there will be no rockets from the West Bank, but I think the administration there from the Palestinian Authority is somewhat different from Gaza.
So let's remember,
have to move on to now to the floor.
Just one 10 seconds. Just
10 seconds.
Remember, please, that between 2005 and 2007, the Palestinian Authority still controlled the West Bank. There were no restrictions of this kind. The restrictions occurred after 2 years when the rockets started to flow. So I think you have cause and effect a little backwards.
Now to the floor. Anyone who has a question, please put your hand high in the air. Remember that your questions must be responded to by both speakers, and please wait for the microphone to be passed around the hall by the relevant committee member. The gentleman in the second row, 2 in from the side.
Thanks very much to both speakers. I'm a Muslim from Syria, and I'm very proudly pro-Jewish. In my opinion, one of the greatest tragedies in the Middle East is the mass exodus of Jews from Arab countries and from the region. Our social fabric and our communities are much poorer for this, and much more needs to be done to mitigate this. However, please explain to me how a Jewish person who's never been to Israel, Palestine, is allowed to return home, quote unquote, whereas a Palestinian who was born there, expelled or fled from there in 1948 or any other time, is not.
Professor.
This sounds like an ethnocracy to me, not a democracy. Can the BDS movement take this right of return issue and other issues forward? Thank you very much.
We'll start with the professor.
So, let me give you a fact that you probably don't know. Under the Palestinian Authority's proposed constitution, the same rules would apply there, and that is a Palestinian who had never been to Palestine would be allowed to return, but a Jew who was born in Palestine would not be allowed to live there or own property. Both the Israelis and the Palestinians have what are called laws of return. About 40 nations in the world have laws of return. The reason Israel has a law of return is very important, because between 1939 and 1945, no country in the world, not Great Britain, not the United States, certainly not any of the Arab countries, opened their doors to Jews who were trying to escape from the Holocaust. And so naturally, inevitably, the first law that Israel passed was a law of return, which allowed any person who was Jewish, and who was Jewish essentially under Hitler's definition of a Jew, not religiously Jewish, not even ethnically Jewish, but somebody who Hitler would regard as a Jew, to have a place, one place in the world to which he or she can return. Will there come a time when perhaps the law of return won't be necessary? I certainly hope so. When we see the end of anti-Semitism around the world, when we see the end of it in France, where Jews of France are now moving to Israel, then we will see an end of the law of return. But in the meantime, it remains as necessary for the nation state of the Jewish people as it's perceived to be by the nation state of the Palestinian people. Thank you.
Mr. Tatchell.
Prior to 1948, the vast majority of land, which is now Israel, was owned by Arabs. Today, less than 3% of that land is owned by Arabs, even though they comprise 21% of the Israeli population. Since 1948, the State of Israel has established over 700 new Jewish settlements. But up until 2013, they hadn't established a single new Arab settlement, apart from resettling Bedouin Arabs who'd been forced off their land. And indeed, in the Negev desert, Bedouin peoples who've lived there for decades are being forced out, while funds and incentives are being given to Jewish settlers to put down roots and establish settlements in the Negev. These are just symptomatic of the ongoing problems of discrimination that the Israeli state perpetuates. And until there is both an end to the occupation and proper legal equality and an end to discrimination against Arabs living in Israel, it's hard to imagine how there can be peace. And so the BDS movement, one of its demands is full legal rights and an end to discrimination against Arab Israelis. It isn't just this land ownership issue, there's poverty. You know, more than half of all poor families in Israel are Arab, whereas they comprise only 1/5 of the population. Arab communities, some aren't even on Israeli maps. They're deprived of facilities that are given to Jewish settlements. This is institutional discrimination, recognized and acknowledged by Israeli organizations like the Association for Civil Rights in Israel and B'Tselem. These Israeli organizations acknowledge the institutional discrimination against Arab people. It was even acknowledged by the Orr Commission, set up by the Israeli government, which said that this institutional discrimination against Arab Israelis is a core problem that fuels radicalization and successive uprisings. The author of that report, Theodore Orr, has complained time and time again that his proposals to address the inequalities faced by Arabs in Israel have not been addressed by the Israeli government.
Professor,
There
your
is, of
thoughts?
course, discrimination in every country. There's discrimination in this country against Arabs. There's discrimination in my country against Arabs. Israel is trying very hard to deal with that discrimination.
He literally got that in before I could hit pause. But yeah, that this claim that Israel is trying very hard to deal with this discrimination is really something. I'm so curious about what specifically they've been doing.
Yeah, I mean, the Israeli Supreme Court has always upheld these practices and covenant communities, and ethnic divisions and like the founding of villages and communities. Not aware of any moves in the Knesset to right. No one's going after the Supreme Court's independence over that. It's how dare the Supreme Court suggest that the Orthodox Jews have to serve in the IDF. Like, that's the only thing I'm aware of. It's not about offering more Palestinians.
Yeah.
And also just Dershowitz is so gross because he's one of these conservatives who acts like a liberal and does all this liberal pandering. I hate racism. Oh, we should have equality. I hope one day we don't need the right of return. Like, it's also regrettable that Israel has to have a Berlin Wall around every inch of Palestine and do active settlements and kill all these people and have these ugly rules. Like, oh, what a pity it is. Because the Palestinians just regret things that I pretend were nice offers, and some guy in Palestine rejected it. Legally, I can proceed. It's just such it's hand-wringing. We just have no choice but to be so aggressive in the country. That's the grossest part. If you want to be Ariel Sharon and be like, yeah, they're evil animals, we killed them. Like, okay, at least I know I'm talking to some fascist. I just hate this.
At least the label on the tin matches what's inside. Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, I'm just so curious about this claim, right? Because Tatchell, made like some very specific statements here. It's like that, you have half of the poor families in Israel proper, right? Not counting the West Bank and Gaza, where of course the poverty is, through the roof. But even just counting, Israel within the Green Line, half the poor families are Arab, even though that's only about a fifth of the population. There are, no new Arab, towns being built. He talked about the displacement of Bedouins, which, by the way, there's, is something that continues to go on right now, right? Within Israel proper, there were just a bunch of Bedouin homes that were destroyed, I believe, earlier this week. And you mentioned the sort of restrictive covenants, right? Which is like a really good point of comparison, because Dershowitz is just like, it's discrimination, lots of places. It's like, yeah, but like, we can make some distinctions here, right? It's like saying like, oh, well, no country has achieved perfect justice. It's like, yeah, okay. But like, that doesn't mean that if we're comparing, Canada with Saudi Arabia, one of these places is significantly more unjust than the other. And it's like, yeah, you know what? In the United States, restrictive housing covenants have been illegal for a very long time. Whereas, in Israel, they continue to be legal to this day. In Israel, a huge amount of land is controlled by the Jewish National Fund, which openly discriminates in who it will lease land to, on ethnic and religious grounds. Which is an example that makes me feel a little bit queasy, because I can remember a bagel place that I really liked where I was growing up, where they had a little JNF donation tin by the cash register, and I can remember dropping some coins in that a few times. Feel pretty gross about it. But this is it's like, oh, I don't really know what that is. Sounds nice. Yeah, plant some trees, right? Again, that would be very illegal under U.S. civil rights law to have like some sort of quasi-state entity that that openly discriminated on racial or religious grounds and who it would lease land to. You know, even talk about the poverty. Yeah, what exactly has Israel been doing to try to rectify this situation? Does Israel have some great like affirmative action programs to help Israeli Arabs? Because I have to say I haven't heard of that.
It's unbelievably low profile program. Israeli
Exactly.
affirmative action program. So low profile, it may not even exist.
Yeah, and like also, to be fair, this debate was 2015, so this was before this. But yeah, Dershowitz is like, oh, they're trying so hard to equalize, conditions of the Israeli Arabs. 3 years later, 2018, something called the nation state law is passed, which writes it into the law that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people, and and it only and that it purely exists to allow the Jewish people to exercise their right to national self-determination. I don't know. I've got to say, if we imagine the United States passing a law that like wrote it into the Constitution that the United States is officially a country of white people, or is officially a country of Christians, or anything like that, that would sound to me like a country that wasn't trying very hard to reverse discrimination against other groups.
Yeah, it's not exactly open arms. I mean, what that sounds like, of course, is fucking South Africa, which, of course, is the spiritual predecessor, in terms of the activism in the Western world. It's the predecessor of the current campaign. It's exactly what we just described. It's, constitutional, institutionalized ethnic separation and segregation and apartheid, as they said. That's why we're doing boycott, divestment, sanctions. Why are you singling out South Africa? Because the world is embargoing them and we're keeping them going. Like that was the Reagan era South Africa relationship. Like every time we're the only evil entity that's vile enough to support some scumbag segregated country that could really benefit from a little positive integration, And it's like, oh, why are you signaling them out? Like everyone else has. We're singled out. It's America that's singled out. Everyone else is like, we're not dealing with you until you respect these people's human rights. We're the ones who should be singled out. We're the ones who are still dealing with a country that's not a pariah for no reason. It's a pariah for its crimes against humanity. God damn it. Constant implication is that we're all just against the Jewish state. Like, not against the Afrikaner state either. Like, they could stop doing this stuff, and I would find it very easy to visit their land and visit their beautiful landmarks. Wish I could do that.
Totally, right? It's a beautiful country, South Africa. But yeah, it's it's just all like, oh man, why are you, why are you going after me? Why are you giving me a hard time? That's I could name you 3 other guys who also killed people. It's like, okay, but like, if you murdered somebody, then like, I mean, I'm like, sure, like maybe we should also be prosecuting some other people, but let's at least prosecute you.
You're the one who wants our money and weapons. So, I mean, you're just like in the front of the line of people who should be in trouble, I feel like.
Yeah. And also like, you don't have the, I don't know. It's also just like, yeah, you're like, obviously American leftists are going to spend a lot of time thinking about this because mainstream American politicians spend a lot of time going on and on and on about how much they love this country. And, so there is like a bit of a cycle there, but also it's the number one recipient of U.S. military aid on the entire planet. So, if you think that the United States should be, doing less, of helping to, should be doing less of that sort of thing around the world, then that would be an obvious place to start, right? I mean, it's like, yeah, if you weren't getting very much money or weaponry from the U.S., then you'd probably get a lot less attention from people who had a problem with U.S. foreign policy. And by the way, speaking of all that money and weaponry, I love this argument that like, well, okay, but obviously because the Holocaust, there was no place else for you to go. It's like, well, so if the implicit argument is, well, if the United States ever became genocidally anti-Semitic, Israel would be like a good backup. It's like, okay, but in that scenario, you must be imagining if the United States has become genocidally anti-Semitic, we're no longer backing Israel, right? Like, but at the same time, I seem to hear Zionists suggest all the time that it's really important that the U.S. continue to back it because, like, it could only survive, right? If the U.S. backs it. So, this is all very confusing. I'm confused, but doubtless Professor Dershowitz will sort out all of our confusion in the post game. So we are going to go to that now. We don't always watch every bit of the Q&A, but we'll do a proper post game. I don't know if we'll watch all of it, but we'll watch a bunch. So if you are already a patron, you should have an email with that link. If you are not already a patron, there's really no time like the present to fix that. Patreon.com/Ben Burgis. So with that, we will see everybody who is in just a moment. Left is best.